All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gimme 5 segment. And on today's segment, we have an opportunity to show you in detail the reaction to the death of a dictatorial, murderous, tyrannical thug. And that's being kind and polite. Now, we earlier showed you Barack Obama's statement, which is outrageous. We showed you the Prime Minister of Canada's statement, which led Marco Rubio to tweet out, if this is serious and not a parody, we got big problems here. And we do. But nobody is worse than the media. The media, who have loved and glorified this murderous thug for decades after decades after decades. And it continued even after his death. Geraldo Rivera. Watch.
If you were from the middle down in Cuban society, in the hierarchy, and you got free medicine that you didn't have under the dictator Batista, if you got some, if you could start a little business, if you could get access to higher education that you couldn't get unless you were an elite under Batista, the dictator that preceded communism and Castro and led to the revolution, you know, you think of Castro in a whole different way. And I think that in fairness, when you look at him and you talk about him, and I heard Governor Huckabee and slamming him, and he's a creep and a dictator and a repressive monster and all the rest. But if you ask the man in the street in Havana today...
Okay. I don't know where to start. So I'll start. Hey, now you could start a little business in Havana. Oh, boy, what a wonderful world it is in Cuba. But let's go to what he said at the end. If you ask the man in the street in Havana, the man in the street... Geraldo, you have to be intelligent enough to understand that if you go to a communist, dictatorial, repressive dictatorship and you ask the man in the street what he thinks of it, he darn well is going to tell you, oh, it's wonderful, because A, if you're a reporter, he'll be afraid you'll show him and report it. B, if he doesn't know who you are, he thinks you're one of the Gestapo, and they'll take you away and they'll put you in a dungeon and they'll never see you again. You have no freedom of speech or thought or expression. So for Geraldo to say, oh, just go to Cuba and ask the man in the street, when the man in the street can't tell you what he's thinking for fear of being killed or tortured. Really, Geraldo? Really? And then Geraldo buys into the biggest line of baloney that's been going on for decades. Watch.
I've been to Cuba several times, particularly back in those days when they were really shut off. I think that it's very easy to have a simplistic view that he was all awful for Cuba and the world, and I just don't think that's accurate. I think that the Cubans have a tremendous sense of pride over his legacy, and I think that he will be remembered fondly. Yes, he was a leftist. Yes, he was a communist. Yes, his economic system failed. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, the Cuban medicine is renowned the world over. There are aspects of what he left behind.
Cuban medicine is renowned the world over. How many, if Geraldo, God forbid, now that he could take a flight, apparently JetBlue went there today, if Geraldo was sick, would Geraldo go to Cuba for his brain surgery or heart surgery or whatever he needs, or would he go to one of the many world-renowned hospitals here in New York City or anywhere in the United States? I think it's the latter. World-renowned Cuba. Even when they show the hospitals and facilities, they look unclean, unkept. It's just, wow. I mean, this need to glorify a communist dictator. Hey, Mussolini, he made the trains run on time, Geraldo. You know? And I'm sure if you look, Hitler might have improved something for the people he wasn't putting in gas chambers. I mean, this is insane. Totally insane. And now let's go back to Peter Jennings. In 1989, ABC, the late Peter Jennings, watch.
Castro has delivered the most to those who have the least. And for much of the third world, Cuba is actually a model of development. Education was once available to the rich and the well-connected. It is now free to all. On January the 1st, 1959, when the Cuban dictator Batista left the country for good, only a third of the population could read and write. Today, the literacy rate is 97%.
Who cares what the literacy rate was? Who cares if they could read and write? They could only read and write what the Cuban government lets them read and write. They have no freedom of expression, no freedom of thought. They can't go to the library and take out a book that they want to read. They can't be curious and say, hey, I'd like to investigate that, if the government says, no, you can't. So what good is a literacy rate when you can't read or say or think or write what you want? Now, these are intelligent people, Geraldo, Peter Jennings. They know better. So you have to think they have some ulterior motives, or had some ulterior motives in the case of Peter Jennings, because they're not stupid people. Here's more from Jennings.
Medical care was once for the privileged few. Today, it is available to every Cuban, and it is free. Some of Cuba's health care is world class. In heart disease, for example, in brain surgery. Health and education are the revolution's great success stories.
You know, Peter Jennings unfortunately died way too young of lung cancer. May he rest in peace. But if he had the ability at that time to go be treated in Cuba, or where he was treated at maybe Sloan Kettering in New York, or wherever he went, you think he'd go to Cuba? I mean, please, enough with this nonsense already. Then there was this PBS report in 1990.
He insists that the system is sound and will work once the mistakes of the past are corrected and the workforce properly motivated. It is not easy to disagree with Fidel. He has defined revolutionary democracy as mass participation. It has also meant following him through action-packed decades of experiments in collective survival and socialist living. A veritable force of nature, Fidel has guided the revolution, destroying the old and building the new Cuba. His power has blown through the island with hurricane force.
Touching. What a man. What a great, great man. Wow. And then, I don't know if you remember this, but this is one example from the McLaughlin Group many years ago.
Frankly, to be a poor child in Cuba may, in many instances, be better than being a poor child in Miami.
Oh, Eleanor,
and I'm
for
not
God's
going to condemn their lifestyle gratuitously.
Eleanor Cliff, the same person who said on my show that Ambassador Stevens in Benghazi wasn't murdered, he died of smoke inhalation. Got that? Okay, that's Eleanor Cliff. Then there was the Elian Gonzalez incident, and here's what Dan Rather had to say.
Fidel Castro, and certainly justified on his record, is widely criticized for a lot of things. There is no question that Castro feels a very deep and abiding connection with those Cubans who are still in Cuba. And I recognize this might be controversial, but there's little doubt in my mind that Fidel Castro was sincere when he said, listen, we really want this child back here.
Yeah, he loved the children because he had to indoctrinate the children. We were made a fool of in that, and shame on Janet Reno, who also passed away not too long ago, and shame on Bill Clinton for sending Elian Gonzalez back to his father to be indoctrinated to be a good little communist. Here's Kate Snow, CNN 2002.
According to a United Nations study, Cuba's regular schools rank at the top in Latin America. Old mansions were converted to classrooms. Under pictures of gun-toting revolutionaries, children are taught Cuban history, along with computer skills, English, and all the basics. For a developing nation, the literacy rate is exceptional at 96%, according to the UN.
There again with the literacy rate, as if it means anything. If all you're allowed to read is communist propaganda, and if you dare question it, you're either killed or thrown in jail and tortured. Great country. Praiseworthy, wouldn't you say? Up next, Newsmax Prime with my friend J.D. Hayworth. Thanks for watching, everyone.